and ask Janine to lead us in a
Koutou. Takataho ki te uru, whakatakato ki te tonga, kia makina kina ki uta, kia tara tara ki tai, kia ki ana te atakura, hei tio, hei huka, ohu, tihei, mau.
Thank you. Safety statement. That. And excuse and no apologies.
Mr. Chair, just apologies for our early departure.
Fine, thank you. And we'll move to the confirmation of the agenda. Thank you, Warren. Seconded. Thank you, Bruce. All those in favour say aye. Against, carried. Thank you. Confirmation of the agenda. Mover and thank you, Paul. Chris, all those in favour say aye. Against, carried. Thank you. Does anyone have any disclosure of interest that they want to draw to the attention of the meeting? It is a no. And that brings us to the minutes. So you need to confirm the minutes of the meeting of the 6th of December, both the public and the both the public and the public resolution. I have a mover and second. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Warren. All those in favour say aye. Against, carried. Thank you. Which brings us on to matters arising. Janine.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is just a standard report tracking those matters that have been noted by committee members in previous meetings and the status of those. So predominantly all of those actions have been closed out, just noting that there is the one that will come back to you in September around the environmental exposure limits, exceedances, and just a standard review of standing operating procedures in relation to those. Also noting, I think as part of that discussion in March, we'd talked about our legal compliance processes and the expectation that those type of events would be picked up through our comply with surveys that are done every 6 months. So the legal services team are doing some work in that space as well, just around lessons learnt, following up on action plans that have been identified by staff where we have zero or non-compliance. So the conversations prompted a bit of a further deep dive into that area and just exactly how we are using that legal compliance tool.
Just through you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, Janine, just around that number 3, and just a pathway back to the relative committees. I know we spoke about that, you know, some of the committees aren't getting the information through, and it does branch across a number of committees. Have we looked at how we can tidy that up?
I think that will be part of what needs to come back to the committee. I think we've identified those different audiences there, and each has a slightly different role to play in it, but important that we are joining those dots up for each of the committees.
Yeah. That is important. Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Have a mover and seconder then to receive the matters arising report. Chris, thank you, Bruce. All those in favour say aye. Against, carried. Thank you. That moves us on to the risk activity report.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So the report starts with sort of that current and emerging risks scan, but maybe at this point, this is normally where I'd throw to the Chief Executive in terms of an opportunity for him to present the things that are top of mind for him, which undoubtedly include these, but there will be some other things that will be topical for Chief Executive to talk to as well.
Thank you, through Mr. Chair. So, yes, there are those things there, and maybe I'll just play off one or two of them. So, I guess the rapid pace of change and reform in central government, it's it's what they promised, it's what they're doing, and of course that has us sort of going around. And it's about the agility of the organisation. We're certainly having to think about that. As well as how we respond to try and influence the change that's happening at rapid pace. Where this plays out, as an example, is in our councils in the freshwater policy space at the moment. Having to, because some of the reform is just creating confusion of what happens in the meantime, and so we're just trying to. Council's been trying to work out what is our position in that. We also have iwi who are giving their strong views on how they think they should be included in the process for being involved. And there are issues which are around our statutory responsibilities, our reputation, and so on. And Council's addressing that. In fact, we've got it in the paper tomorrow. But I think that with the rapid pace of change, it puts us in the uncertainty of what happens in the interim, that puts us into that space. Another thing that's on my mind is the recent decision from Te Waka to discontinue, and they're actually liquidating the company, and what that means for regional economic development in the region, where the leadership's coming from for that, and expectations of many different parties who all have a view, and expect things to be quickly worked out. And that probably starts to point towards what regional leadership looks like in the Waikato region, the Mayoral Forum, the large amount of central government MPs, what they're doing in the space, and all business leaders and so on. The one other thing I think I'd mention is the kind of the what-if scenario. So whilst we're in tighter economic conditions, there's a lot of reform going on. What if there was geopolitical tension, which had a major impact again? What if there was a weather event that had a major impact? What if there was a pandemic type of a thing that occurred again? What would that mean? And because I think it's easy to lose sight of those what ifs, but he's doing stuff at pace. So be the main things in my mind, Mr. Chair.
It makes you think, doesn't it?
There's no questions from the committee on those points. We can step into the other aspects of the report, which I guess is the review of our strategic risks, noting that 3 deep dives have been completed for this quarter, being emergency response, relationships and fraud. The only one that has had a change to its pre and post control risk rankings has been the relationships risk. Just noting there the impact of central government legislative reforms on the relationships between council, the local community, as well as iwi Māori. In terms of the emergency response risk, just the key points there noted through page 25. I guess some of the key updates are really on council's ability to respond from a human capital perspective, the resources that we have trained to step into those types of events, and the pressure that the inability to do that has on council's ability to deliver business as usual activities. So elected members may recall that we have an LTP measure which sees us working towards closing that gap over the next 2 years. So not an immediate fix, but a commitment to training of those staff over the next 2 years. I'd just note probably in here, because the relationship with the Civil Defence Emergency Management Group is sort of called out in this space. Obviously, there's the recent report from the government inquiry into severe weather events, which will be a key consideration in the space, together with the review of the Civil Defence Emergency Management Act and just roles and responsibilities between that group and council. In terms of relationships, which starts on page 27, just noting there is, as I've already commented, around the uncertainty of how changes to key legislation will impact relationships that the regional council holds with the community or different sectors of the community, and just acknowledging, I guess, that current uncertainty or unknown impact. In there, and on page 28, in terms of the fraud risk deep dive, really just updating that to reflect current economic trends. We know it's still hard out there for our communities and people within our communities and our staff, some of those people within the community. So just acknowledging that, as well as probably the other key change in the space is around the fraud risk controls, noting the effectiveness of each control so that we can work or provide focus to those areas that are assessed as potentially being less effective at the moment, and how we can strengthen activity in those spaces. Mr. Chair, happy to take any questions from the committee. My apologies, it's been highlighted this morning that we haven't included the information in the report on risk mitigations, so we can circulate that to committee members, just so that you do actually have that complete information from these deep dives for your records.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Janine, and that would be good if you could do that.
Yeah.
Do the committee have any questions raised at this time? No? It would be helpful if we could actually see that report that was done on
The central government inquiry.
yes, on civil defence. Because I was wondering, when was the last time that we did a review of our civil defence plan for this region? Make sure they're all fit for purpose.
Can I note that in terms of something to come back to the committee on?
Yeah.
I think we've had a previous action, which, to be fair, we haven't followed up on, just in terms of that whole civil defence landscape, some of the work that's happening around lifelines in particular, so that the committee has some understanding and confidence in terms of the work that's happening there in light of other events that have happened around the country.
Yes. Thank you. I think that would be very good.
Through you, Mr. Chair, if I could just make a comment that there's two things here. There's the Civil Defence Emergency Management Framework, and we have a group plan, which I think through the joint committee has been revised in the last few years. I'll need to check that and get that. But there's also our council's own emergency response framework. Just wanted to just make it clear there's two different things. It gets a bit confused because we hold the Civil Defence Emergency Management Group within our council as well, but we had to have some separation.
Yes. So, Chris, just to clarify, the plan that this council has relates to the council.
Council's
WRC.
Responsibilities for emergency response.
And then you're a party to the Waikato Joint Civil Defence Plan for the region.
Correct.
Right. Well, it would be helpful to know when they both were last reviewed, I think. I just think we've seen events over recent times which have found some of those reports to be less than ideal, I think, in the responses. I'm just very much aware of some comments that have been made about the response in Hawke's Bay, where they were having to make it up for more than 50% of the time. I think I would like to have some assurance that a better situation exists here in Waikato.
Yeah, thank you. And I think that there might even be comment in the Guru Mataparo report about arrangements that they see might work a little bit better, and we're called out as one, but there's a whole review of the civil defence framework nationally going on anyway, which this review has helped support. I just see that Greg Ryan is online. I don't know if Greg's got any comment about the emergency response framework when it was last reviewed internally.
Yeah, good morning, members. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, so the emergency response framework was an internal document that was adopted, I think it was within the last 1 to 2 years. And this is a document that brings together the range of emergency management functions that council has, not only civil defence, also marine oil spills, flood response, incident response as well. So basically the range of functions and how we work together as a council to initiate those responses as needed. I wonder if it would be worth providing the committee with a overview of that plan at its next meeting.
I think that would be a good idea.
So through the chair, probably Greg, then the opportunity to show how that works relative to the civil defence arrangements as well, so that the committee can understand where there's overlap and where there's separation as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And if I can speak briefly to that, the emergency response framework acknowledges that we do have a role to play from civil defence point of view, that we do have capacity that often gets drawn into a civil defence response. And so we need to proactively plan for supporting that role as well as what we need to do as a council.
Thank you. Angela.
Oh, yeah. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, probably an overarching thing across maybe 2 or 3 of the areas is that relationship risk and communicating with our partners early, including them in the process. Just, Janine, you mentioned before about the mitigations not being included. Would that go some ways to address, just can you help me understand what, if I'm missing anything in the report? We've highlighted the risks, political risks, you know, and number 25, a new political risk driver was added, concerns that there are possible gaps in communicating and coordinating. And then specifically under the relationship strategy, you know, views that are contrary to our own policy and legislated responsibilities. How does staff see us managing those risks and yeah. Would that be in that mitigation piece that you mentioned?
Yes, so through the chair, effectively what we have in here are the risk drivers. So this is what's giving rise to the risk. What we haven't provided are the mitigations or controls that are actually in place to address those risks, to understand then what the residual is. So that's probably not helpful for this conversation in terms of understanding exactly where those mitigations are. But I think the council process by which you are agreeing on, I guess, council's views, submissions to pieces of legislation and that type of thing, are some of the controls that we will have in place in terms of consistency of that messaging. in making sure that there is a clear council position on matters as they're coming up.
Bruce.
Yeah, well, I'm in a scenario where the questions have been raised, but because we haven't seen the mitigation report, I don't think we should be doing anything more on this report right now. Is it not possible to circulate it immediately? If it exists, can't we see it before the end of this meeting, before we start making comments?
So through the chair, I'm just looking at the team over there that have the information, whether that can be pulled together and flick it to me and I can flick it around the committee members, please.
Is that going to be possible?
Can I just get a yes? Can I just get a yes or a no from the team in terms of the ability to provide the rest of the risk? So we've got risk drivers. We need the mitigations information.
Through the chair, yes, we can do that.
Yeah, well, that would be really helpful because otherwise, you know, the questions have been posed, some new risks in some cases have been identified, but without knowing what our mitigation, having a discussion about the mitigation, I don't think we're closing the loop.
No. I take the point. I think it would be a good idea to hold off any further discussion of this paper until we get the rest of those papers and the opportunity to look at them. Good point. Thank you, Bruce. So with that in mind, can we move on to the next item, which is the internal audit activity update?
So through the chair, sorry, the committee members may not have met Fiona Hunter previously. Fiona's the face behind a number of these reports. We've got Scott in the background, who's the strategic risk advisor, who reports to Fiona. Fiona's part of my team. So rather than you having to sit here and listen to me all day, thought we'd freshen it up a little bit. And Fiona will be presenting some of the reports to you today. And I see David's just jumped online as well. Morning, David.
Mario, how's everybody?
Good, thank you, David. Good morning, members, Mr. Chair. So the internal audit activity update reports being presented for you. The key things to note is there's 2 new audits that have been completed this quarter, being the project management framework review and the risk management maturity review, which David can talk to about the updates. There's also a slight change to the timings of the audit schedule, which is in the report as well. So those are key things. So if you have any questions, otherwise we can put it over to David to update. Thank you.
Great. Good morning. I'm just waiting to see if Sharif, who did the project review, is dialing in. He's just saying a few technical issues. I might, if it's okay, I might start with the risk report first, if that is all right, and then we'll come back to the project management. I think he's just missing the link. So two important reviews done. You know, both the project management framework and the risk management frameworks are really quite key underpins. Risk supports the broader, you know, approach to supporting strategy. It supports governance, obviously, in your role as councillors. And it's an area that I think all directors across New Zealand are looking for uplift, whether in local government and government or in corporate. So a very key area. And then projects. You know, Waikato Regional Council has done a number of strategic projects over the years. From an organisational point of view, you know, compared to BAU, although you would almost argue some of the projects that WRC, particularly infrastructure, all those types of projects are BAU, but projects is where change occurs. So there is heightened risk around making sure that those are run effectively. And if you look at the drivers of erosion of shareholder value, projects is often a key element where that causes that destruction of shareholder or stakeholder value. And for WRC, projects will be a key area where outcomes are generated for your communities and for your broader stakeholders. So actually, I'll go back to the plan because Sharif is now on. So look, in terms of the project management review, so this was looking at the broader framework rather than deep dives into specific projects that we've done in the past. It was looking at the overarching framework. So do we have the right structures, the right policies to build that culture around projects? So it was an overarching view to look at, are we seeing the elements that we would expect to see to support a solid approach to projects? I think there were a number of positive recommendations made, and first and foremost, I think the response to the observations that we've made shows that there's a very good open culture, and both to being open to suggestions, but also more generally, our perspective was there has been very good progress around building this up, and keen engagement to continue that view. So, there has been a comprehensive library of project management resources, which is really important. Often we see projects being run often by contractors and part-timers because we don't have a wealth of experienced project managers in New Zealand. And obviously having that clarity around, what is expected of them within the environment of Waikato Regional Council is really important, and good commitment both at EPO level and executive level. But, as expected, and, I think to expect a fully clean report, I'd almost be thinking that's unusual. So I think there's been some good observations made, and I'll get Sharif, who led the review on the ground, to overview those at a high level.
Awesome. Thanks, David. Hey, everyone. So yes, as David said, there was a number of key positives that we saw. So I think if we start off with them, because it's a good place to start, it's that WRC has a comprehensive library of resources and templates to support project managers, and that we found to be quite beneficial. There's a very committed enterprise portfolio office. Again, we think that's quite a good thing going forward, to, especially when we get to some of the key recommendations, to have the EPO driving this will be of great benefit to WRC. And then finally, there's an awareness at executive level on the state of play. So in particular, what's working well, what's not working well. Leadership are aware of that, which is quite a positive. So with respect to opportunities for growth, there was 15 recommendations across 7 focus areas of project management. These 15 recommendations we can group into 5 overarching observations. So those 5, if we begin with that, number 1 is projects must be consistently set up for success. So what we mean by that is, at times, we found that project initiation was poor, and that led to quite a few of the downstream issues. Number 2 was that project managers require appropriate capability and capacity to perform their roles effectively. So what we mean by that is, on occasions, there was divergence between the capability and capacity and ambitions of the staff in terms of project management requirements. Third thematic finding is there's a blended approach to resourcing of project manager roles at WRC. This is good in terms of it provides flexibility and specialist capabilities. Also, you can bring people on when there's surge demand. But on the flip side, this needs to be controlled. We found that the onboarding and offboarding can be uplifted to ensure that when people come on board, there is consistency in terms of the application of templates and guidelines. And then in terms of offboarding, taking people continuance of knowledge. So there's a proper debrief to permanent staff, as well as proper documentation of those files. The 4th one was, we think a regular no-blame governance culture will help facilitate meaningful conversations. So there was a few isolated areas where we saw that project governance could be uplifted so that it's focused more on problem solving. And then the fifth and final one was on benefits management. So with no clear vision or purpose of the projects with respect to organizational context, sometimes as the projects were being executed, the initial reason for why the projects were being created was kind of getting lost. And then at the back end, measuring project success in terms of outcomes and benefits, that wasn't as impactful because there was no clear link back to the overarching organizational strategy. So those were the kind of 5 thematic findings that the 15 recommendations fall under. Management comments in terms of feedback on them, they were very supportive and agreed with all 15 recommendations. It must be noted that we carried this work out in February, March, and the report was issued 30th of April. So some of the actions may well be underway in the last couple of months, but all 15 recommendations were supported by management, and in their comments, they detailed how they will tackle it, which can be found in Appendix D of our report.
I would say that these, and I noted a little bit in my introduction, a lot of these issues are quite common across the sector and more broadly, and things such as benefits realisation. We often see organisations thinking of that at the end of the project rather than throughout the life cycle of the project to make sure that we keep very centred on where we're heading, and particularly in local government around the initiation of projects, the build-up of costings, thinking of contingency management, building into those budgets is again quite a perennial project issue that we see across the sector.
Any questions from the committee?
Yep. Paul. So I've got to thank you for the report, and this, I think it's a positive report in many ways, and it's good that there's some things to work on. I've got 2 principal and questions. The first is about looking at some of the deficiencies. We have different people doing different stuff here. And so on the infrastructure side, as you said, we're doing projects all the time. It's kind of what we do. So I wouldn't expect to see these deficiencies as well represented in the infrastructure side as I might in a general change project within the organisation, where I'd kind of expect this to happen actually. So can you comment on the difference in performance between the infrastructure side of the business, which sort of does projects for a living, and the rest of the business?
Yeah, Paul, it's Jerry probably add to this if he does have a flavour from the review. Just want to note that the scope, we weren't drilling down into individual projects. So sometimes we do the reviews and we might pick an infrastructure project, we might pick another project to see how those, where the design of the EPO is flowing through into those projects. That wasn't in the scope for this review. I think it would be an interesting angle, but Sharif, I don't know if you picked up any nuances as you did the review, even though it wasn't in the detailed scope.
Yeah, not quite to that level. And as you said, David, we purposefully didn't deep dive into any projects, and this was more of a portfolio view from a holistic WRC angle. So yeah, I wouldn't be able to unfortunately comment on individual divisions. This is more, but the point about standardization and bringing it all up to an equal level with the support of EPMO, irrespective of the nature of the project, is quite important, we think, because that good project management principles are good project management principles, and for the organization to have a portfolio view across different parts of its organization would then help answer some of those questions potentially as well for you guys internally.
I suspect, Paul, though, I think your hypothesis that infrastructure would probably be a little bit further ahead, although there have been some very big non-infrastructure projects that WRC has gone through at the same time. So, but I suspect the infrastructure side would have more maturity in parts in some of these areas. But observations such as the commonality of systems, as Sharif has just said, around bringing everyone up to the level, I think would probably still be valid across those areas.
Okay, well, that's kind of not the answer I expected, but it's kind of interesting. Because I would expect that with an infrastructure project before it starts, the benefit analysis has been worked out, the people know why they're building the piece of infrastructure. I mean, it is the big thing we have here is infrastructure, right? That's what we do. I know there's a lot of other projects, and that they have a standard setup process that meets the requirements of the project office. So I kind of would expect a way higher standard there. Because the way I see it is you have three things. You have a team that builds infrastructure or reviews, manages, and adds to infrastructure or upgrades it or improves it regularly. And I'd expect, and they're usually engineers and they're usually very logical people and they kind of work this way anyway. So I'd kind of expect a high quality from them, and I'd be disappointed if it's not. And then we have a big change project, like we get an IT project, or we hire a project manager or we have an internal one, and it's a high focus because it's a big thing. But every day we're also doing stuff. So I expect to see different types of behaviours. And I wouldn't expect a sort of a one view. I'd expect the infrastructure people really know what they're doing, and the project management's part of what they do. And of course, there's a big overlap. I mean, I noticed with interest the optimism bias and the costing, and that is a challenge. It needs to be fixed, actually. But this overlaps with the next report, which is risk management, because if we're running these projects, it's not the only role, but part of the role of the PM is to manage risk. And so those risk registers and the mitigations updates, again, I'd expect that in the infrastructure to be what they do every day, and if it's a change in the accounting team, well, they may need some support because they probably don't do a project every day. So.
But Paul, I'd say around the benefits management, there is a little bit of a philosophical difference we find. We've for 10 years, I would say, been saying, look, you need to be thinking about benefits realization from day one. We still, in high infrastructure organizations, still find it's the last piece that they think about. I don't know, though, if there's anyone from management in the room that might comment on their perception, perhaps, of whether there is a difference in maturity between the infrastructure project teams and the non-infrastructure project teams.
I think.
Supposed to come back this time.
Yeah,
Come
through
back to us.
through the chair, I think what the EPO is trying to do at the moment is to get really clear visibility in terms of our portfolio of projects, so that we actually have them in a single reporting tool to be able to understand and be able to understand some key aspects of that information, including who are our project managers. I think the comments in here around a hybrid model of project management is probably most strongly seen in the infrastructure space. So a lot of that is not actually our own staff. We're actually buying in some of that expertise. In terms of maturity, all I can say is that is probably the centre of where the bulk of the project management is happening, as you've said, Paul. But the efficacy or relative maturity of that, I probably don't have a clear view on.
Okay, fine. Well,
but we can certainly report back on that, like I say, work that the EPO is trying to do to gather the information, get that portfolio view, some heat mapping, all of that information, as well as supporting with training around business casing, benefits management, all of those things that are sort of at either end in some ways of the continuum is work that we're actively doing.
yeah, so rather than getting anything more now or soon, it might be better to wait sort of 6 months until you've done most of the work, and then when you report back on the work, you say, oh, well, this is how we're finding it.
Yeah.
So I've got one other little thing, if I can just have the space. So as I said, I expected there to be infrastructure projects, which is all well one, that there's big strategic projects that aren't infrastructure, where you're going to put a lot of effort into the PM side and the transparency, and we're seeing this in our report, so that's all good. This is good, so obviously it's happening. But then you have other little things happening in the organisation, and the philosophy of project management has to apply, but you don't want to have everyone with a little tiny project weighed down with a huge complex set of documents to complete. So is there like a PM light version or a way in the documentation that the people can sort of apply the principles but not fill out 1,000 forms when they're doing just a small project, which is not your everyday job to do small projects, by the way. So I don't know, is it even going to answer that one? I'll shut up.
Don't whether KPMG want to answer from their observations or I can from a EPO perspective.
Yep, I can go first from what we saw. And the answer to that, Paul, is yes, there is tailoring being made. So some of the resources and tools the EPMO has made available first establishes if it's a project or if it's BAU, and then depending on the complexity of the project, it points towards how much documentation is required and how much effort needs to go into project management. So yes, and as we from our observations, we can see WRC is very cognizant of that. So when we made recommendations, we said to keep that in mind when you apply some of these actions as well.
Chris.
Thank you. Very Mr. Chair, I think, sorry, Paul, you've hit it on the head. There's projects and there's projects. And the big projects get the visibility and we have key projects, reference groups and everything gets wrapped around it. But what happens with all the other things that go on and where's the line between what's a project and what's not a project? And I think that's exactly the path of what we've been going down. And I think that has probably been identified. But we're still on a ways in our maturity around that. We recognise that there's still more work to do there. Even in the infrastructure space, I think, Greg, you're online, it would be fair to say there's some of those bigger projects as well. And there's that plethora of other stuff that gets done, so much within projects and maybe so much within work programs. But we are trying to delineate it and we are trying to get our heads around what we do well, probably at the smaller end of the project sense, and have we got the right project management capacity, and so on.
David, I'm having difficulty in really getting a feel for how good or how bad our project management framework is. You've given us some suggestions of things that are doing well. From page 58, you list then 6 areas which you describe as matters which are fundamental to the system of internal control can seriously compromise the system of internal control and data integrity and should be addressed as a matter of urgency. I didn't feel that the sense of urgency or significance came through in the report. Can you give me a steer as to how you really saw this overall for the benefit of the committee and how it would compare with other councils?
Yeah, let me collect my thoughts. So Graham, I think there are some, the issues that we've found are not dissimilar to issues I've seen, across a wide range of councils and, more broadly organisations. I think with projects, there's almost like a continuum, focus goes in to build up EPMO. Actually, I was just talking to someone this morning and, organisations have a short memory around projects. They often build up these EPMOs to respond to systemic issues around projects, whether it being cost overruns, failures in those projects. And then they seem to lose either patience or focus or cost becomes a factor and they take the foot off the pedal, sometimes disestablishing those EPMOs. I think this is an evolution and a build-up of Waikato. Waikato Regional Council's capability. You've had a number of large projects in the past. Some of those have gone very well, some not so well, some have been bumpy along the way. Trying to get that consistency, I think, is very important. I see this as positive. I don't see this as a glaring red hole, but these are important areas to get right. That's why some of them are rated as red, but they're not overnight fixes either. So they're quite cultural. They're similar to the risk management framework, quite cultural, will take sustained effort and focus to change that culture and to get that clarity of how do we do projects at WRC and how should we do them well. So I think that is going to require sustained focus and investment at that EPMO level to make sure that you get the benefits out of it in the medium to long run. That's how I would frame it up. Sharif, would you add anything to that?
Yep, largely agree with fully agree with what you just said, David. In terms of, comparing to similar organizations, we would say it's on average, about what we'd expect. But those willingness to improve with the EPMO, and if you implement these recommendations successfully, then really it's going to lift it from probably similar to other local government organizations to that higher echelon of very high performing with respect to project management. So current state's probably about average, but that willingness is something which we don't see often. So that's a big positive, which will drive it towards the higher end of performance.
So on page 54, you talk about WRC having been on a journey of improvement, which I read positively, but I didn't read page 58 as positive. Can you just help me? I'm still struggling really.
So, Brian, 58 is really, usually that page is at the back of the report because it's a way that we prioritize focus. So the low, medium, high is the way that we rate our observations as to importance. Now, that doesn't mean that you've got a smoking gun ready to, or a disaster waiting to happen, but it is rated, we have rated issues red because they are important because of the widespread pervasive nature of the success of these and outcomes of these projects to WRC's outcomes it wants to achieve. So that table is just a way that we use to focus management's attention on the most important things. But it's not all about downside risk, it's upside risk as well. And maybe the definition is quite downside focused, but again, this is important stuff because this is how you get, a lot of the outcomes that you're planning to get for your community, or for your stakeholders.
Jennifer.
Thank you for the presentation from KPMG. I'm really keen to hear more from our CE and CFO. Because obviously what matters is the response to it. I would really like the committee to consider a standing item to see progress on this, say 6 monthly or so. Because when I read it, I think it's one of the most damning reports we've had that I've read. And I'm really great to hear that there's willingness to improve. I'm not surprised at that at all. But it does highlight some culture things, the silo nature, some lack of discipline. I mean, I'm drawing on my experience from my previous employer a long time ago now. It was one of the largest, if not the largest, organization in the country. And I was a frustrated employee there all the time because various projects were not closed out properly but projects are, as has been said, our biggest opportunity to make progress. But it's also a fantastic opportunity for wastage if they aren't carried on in a disciplined manner. So I think it's all about how we respond. I think it's about keeping track of that response to make sure that it has focus. I draw upon my experience in EPC last triennium when we made an standing agenda item to look at the TA's compliance with their wastewater treatment plants, and performance lifted because it had that extra look. So that's the direction I'd be going in.
Can I just comment quickly on the damming comment? Look, you could read it. I know there's a number of areas to respond to, but I think it's really important to note. To me, a damning internal audit report is when we come up with a view that is completely at odds and unaccepted by management, and I don't feel that's the case. I think there's been an openness to bring us in to build, to help build the journey. So I think that is quite a key difference to, we did a asset management review years ago. Now in that situation, following quite a systemic failure of flood banks, the view was that the asset management was very good. Actually, we had quite a different view. That to me is quite a different picture to the one that we're seeing today.
I do actually appreciate you pushing back on that, David. I felt disappointed reading it I think the word damning is probably a bit far to go, but you've gotten it from the rest of what I've said, and I'm keen to keep the focus on this because how we work is so important for delivering on the results and doing it efficiently.
Yes.
So yeah, through the chair, I guess as the person that the EPO reports to, I have very much been across, I guess, the management responses to the findings that are included in the report. And so have worked with our EPO lead to make sure that we have the right tenor to that coming through. I think the findings need to be seen in light of the fact that our EPO was re-established probably about 2 years ago. So this is, it's been actually a short run journey. The EPO also comprises 3 staff, of which for a lot of that time we've only had 2. So there's been a substantial amount of work that has been done around some of the fundamentals of those training materials, the knowledge base articles, the how-to, the good guidance that has been delivered and has been a focus for the team in terms of this is what good should look like here. Increasingly with that under their belt, they are working across the organisation and probably particularly around that project in that project initiation space to make sure that things are actually set up right from the get-go before any work is commenced. And if we get that right, then we should have more confidence in things being able to flow from that. An example of the work that they've been doing is taking all of the LTP business cases that have been approved by council, because that's the new investment or the area where change will happen, and determining is this a project or is it BAU, but working really proactively with all of those business owners to go, okay, what are we doing? How are we setting this up? Who's responsible? What are the budgets? Where are they sitting? How are we reporting? All of that work with the intent of when we get to 1st of July, we're positioned for success with that. So I think this is a journey. It's probably about where I would have expected the report to be at this point in time. But I think it's really nice to hear from the KPMG team the openness of the organisation as a whole to carry on with this journey, and an acknowledgement of the importance of this, because if we don't get this right, that is a fundamental failing for the organisation.
Great answer, Janine. And I just want to say, I read in here where it came out that there is a lot of capacity pressure on this team of 3 with you as well. And so I just want to say how much I appreciate the effort put in by that team and with this journey. I just think if we did come back to this from time to time at this committee, that would allow us to really track the journey with you and make sure that that capacity and capability and everything can build with the intention that you're traveling on, just to make sure that the support is there.
I think the next review should follow up on these aspects. And management should continue to report on the closeout of these issues from an internal audit point of view. Further to Paul's comment and others, the next review, and maybe it's in 6 to 8 months, is to follow up the status of these and then do some deep dives as to how these standards are being applied in specific projects would be a good next review.
Bruce.
Yeah, well, look, many of the things I'm going to say now, I'll try not to repeat things that have been said, but I was in a very similar space to our chair in the way you articulated the situation at the beginning. I would have been expecting, because this is a report to this committee, that we would have read it, and we have. And I would have been expecting today a much more direct response from the organisation as my role in governance. First of all, to hear many of the ingredients that Janine just outlined. So I think we could have got to that really quickly. And I'm still waiting actually to hear a comprehensive response from the organisation about what they think about this report. It's not for KPMG to tell us about what they think management thinks. It's for management to tell us as governors what space they're in and what their response will be. And I would have been seeking a more comprehensive response, which addresses in particular each of the areas that are classified as red, because I'm sorry, I look at red and I'm thinking this is serious. And when I look at the topics that are covered by red, I think they are. So I'm pushing back also on some of the commentary around, we've heard also from KMPG. So look, I just wanted some assurance today, because I'm actually in the same space as I was with the other topic. You know, when we get that list of new risks for the organisation, but we don't have the mitigation. Because what we're now talking about is the mitigation and response to a report which has identified a number of serious issues. And so I just want some assurance today, because it may be too soon now for the organisation to come back and give us a bit of a rundown on each of these topics. That is indeed the organisation's response to the report, that they do agree with it and they intend to do something about it. And I want a timetable of knowing when we're going to hear about each of the areas that are currently coded red.
So through the chair, if I can respond to that, in the report, so page 71 onwards, it's Appendix D. So the report has the findings, and then Appendix D has the management comments in response to each of those findings.
I want to hear it from you. We've read those, but we want to know from you, what is your response? You largely, I believe, got to that point eventually. I want to know that every one of those areas, you agree that they're a problem, and I want to know how it's going to be fixed.
The intent was that our response and what we're going to do about those things is canvassed within the management comments. And so, as I said, that's a bit that I've been particularly focused on to make sure that that's an appropriate response to the findings that have been given. I'm not sure what more I can add on that.
I think, Bruce, you raise a good point, because I think the way I've read this, KPMG have raised some very serious concerns, the wording they used on page 58, but there doesn't seem to be any disagreement by management with those points, and they seem to be accepting and already taking action. To me, the important thing really is, what's the time frame that we can expect to see, because the words were used that if we had implemented all those, we would be at a much higher status in terms of our level of controls. And I would think Clarence sitting down the back there would be very interested to hear about the impact of these changes on what the control environment of WRC would be. I think this is actually a very difficult report to read. Personally, you know, it starts out, normally, David, your reports give us sort of an overall measure of where we stand. And I think the reason we've struggled so much with this report is we didn't get that this time. We got some pluses and some minuses. We then got management's acceptance, but we're still left wondering where and hence our question, how do we compare?
That's my main point. We're still left wondering, what is the mitigation and response? It's all very well to just, you know, say, oh yeah, we agree.
Yes.
And then for KPMG to tell us they agree, but that's not the point. The point is, how are we going to change what's happening? What is the mitigation? What is the change that will occur? And how will we timetable that in a way that we can all be confident that you know, we've heard the comment about the LTP projects, for example, and that is clearly an opportunity, an amazing opportunity to start afresh. But we still need some reporting back on how that will happen.
I agree. Chris.
Through you, Mr. Chair. I suppose the conversation's gone from this is a damning report to but on the back of that to and therefore what's the response? We can't see strongly enough from a leadership perspective how we're responding to that. And look, I just want to reiterate what Janine has said. I think there are comments that go beyond we agree with the finding in the report. It actually does say how we intend to respond and address going forward. But I think the point's been, what I've picked up, and I just wanted to check that I've got it right, is the way the report's been outlined makes it difficult to see the key issues and the responses to it, as opposed to having to fossick around to find it. And given the nature of it, that you would like us to get some more management or leadership articulation of the response, I think we'll take that on board, and I think that could be a note and an action, and we can come back. But I just want to say that I do believe a lot of the response is in the report. And what I just want to give the committee assurance of, this is absolutely up there in terms of what ELT is trying to address in the organisation to make it work better. And it has been for a number of years. Last few years, we've had the EPMO office in there to really try and lift the game. Can we go faster? We're paddling pretty quick. You know, we've had key projects we've had to keep an eye on, and now we're going down and trying to look at the general and the business. And, you know, one of the questions I'm very keen as a CE to get across is, yes, we're across our projects. I want to say, well, I want to be across our projects, and yes, I want to be across those other programs of work where there's obviously, there can be quite big expenditure in as well. It's not just projects. And we're trying to work that interface.
Can I just make one last, and it'll be the last time I say it. It's the nature of when you put stuff in an appendix, the question is it important or not? And you know what? It would have been better to have a separate report from the organisation telling us what their response was. I find this a strange process where one organisation, the organisation being reviewed is then put into a scenario of being in an appendix in someone else's report, and that's their response. No, I can't see that that is the way that you do this sort of stuff. I'm sorry.
It's a common approach.
Well, it may well be common.
It's all too,
it looks cozy too. I don't like the look.
well, I'm more concerned about, as I say, the committee getting a clear impression about what the situation is. Warren.
Yeah, look, thanks, Graham. And I don't want to run over everything that everybody else has said, and I agree, and I can see a way forward. But what really concerns me, and from my experience outside this organisation, is we have serious issues right across the project from the beginning to the end. So, you know, when you're making comments around that, there's no idea of scope, there's no idea of budget on some of these projects. Gentlemen, KPMG, can you give me an idea of sort of a percentage of our projects that this sort of relates to, this red area, and these comments you sort of make, just even on project initiation? Where are we talking? You know, are a quarter of our projects sort of mismanaged right from the beginning? Is it half? Is it a generalisation? I mean, we've spoken that we have extensive templates and guidelines, yet we can't even seem to get the starting point right. I'm just trying to get a level of what that relates to in sort of numbers.
Yeah, look, it's again, I'll ask Truth to make comments after I've spoken. It's hard to put a percentage mark on it. And look, I think you used the word mismanaged again. I just want to be careful of what we're saying is, and this is a common issue across local government, is when you start out with putting projects into long-term plans, you know, there is a cost envelope that's put to those, then it goes into actual delivery of the project. There is complexity around understanding those costs. What we've highlighted is there needs to be better understanding of the costs, considering of contingency to make sure that we have some risk allowance in that costing. I don't believe we're saying that it's completely flawed, but we're saying it could absolutely be better. So, Sharif, would you add to that?
Yeah. So as you said, it's hard to put a percentage on because the part of the recommendations is to build that portfolio view to accurately report on the numbers. But a strong theme that came through in the interviews was on a number of occasions. So I wouldn't say it's more than half, but say a quarter or less than a half, but more than isolated incidents. So you're talking in the range of, around a quarter or less. Those red areas like project initiation being poor was a strong theme that came through. So that's why the recommendations made to use that library of resources that's available, because kind of what we got was there's library of resource, if we pick on that project initiation being poor one, there's resources available to address that. It's just uplifting areas of the organization to make sure that everyone's aware of them, they're consistently using them, and then there's a culture of these resources need to be used for the purposes of the wider good of the organization. And then in that same breath, the recommendations around building that portfolio view, so mandating the use of SODA, for example, which the organization has adopted as its PM tool, that would then give you those numbers to really back up. Here's the current situation. It's X% that are not meeting the standard. And then 6 months down the line, you can report back and say, now it's dropped to Y%. So without even establishing that reporting from a standard method, it's hard to give exact numbers.
Hey, look, thank you, appreciate that, and looking forward to seeing where we go with this. As has been discussed by other committee members, it's what we do with this report and how we move forward that is really important. Thank you.
Chris.
Well, thanks, Mr. Chair. Look, my observations and questions really follow on from some of the points that Paul was raising earlier on. And the first one is, what triggers EPO involvement? Because we've talked about different sizes of projects. Some projects should just be handled as business as usual. So I'd really like to know that there is a clear trigger point, if you like, for EPO involvement. And when they get involved, do we have a management delivery manual, which is absolutely mandatory to be completed? You mentioned templates, you mentioned documentation, but is that all kept in one place? Are people aware of the existence of this, and are they obligated to complete it? Whether they be internal staff delivering on it or external consultants, because as far as I'm concerned, if external consultants involved, then they should be subject to the same rigours as the regional council staff. And my last point, I'm interested in why you didn't interview the director responsible for our biggest project delivery sector, which is integrated catchment. I would have thought Greg should have been one of those on your list of interviewees. So I'm just interested to understand why he wasn't included in there. Thank you.
I suspect it's again, Jareth, if you could add, but I suspect it's given the scope of the review, as noted, focusing more on the build-up of the EPMO, which has been set up to help support projects in general rather than specifically in terms of infrastructure or software. So that may be the reason. If we were to drill down, I suspect it would have definitely been on there. But Sharith, any other views on that?
Yeah, so I guess in answering a few of those questions, one of the things which we cited in the report that is available to WRC staff is a simple questionnaire to say, is this a project? Yes or no. So project or BAU. And then if it's a project, it classifies the complexity of it and then triggers those requirements. So there is that available. But to your point, it's probably not mandated, and it's not as widely known as we would like it to be. So for a high functioning organization, we would say everyone's aware of it and there's a culture of everyone using it constantly. So it's that missing awareness and use piece that made that red. And then secondly, in terms of the resource available, it's all saved on easily accessible locations from what we could see to WRC staff. And there are guidelines and documentations which point you everywhere. So that's what we would expect from a good organization in terms of a documenting point of view. Again, it's that awareness and use piece that we saw from our interviews and largely from our interviews, that it was missing. So it goes, the foundation's there, it's not being used, which is then resulting in these risks to the organization. Finally, in terms of the interview list and that person that was missing, we kind of took guidance from WRC staff on that based on the scope. So yeah, that's how we formed that list based on staff that were available and the scope of works we were engaged to carry out.
Thank you, Sharif. Can I just ask one further question?
Sure.
Did you review the documentation in the manual? And if you did, is it complete and fit for purpose?
Yes, from what the documents we were given, it was fit for purpose and it met the needs. It's more the use and awareness and mandating of it that brings these risks about, in particular the red risks, which is why, to everyone's point in the discussion previously, it's about actioning those recommendations to uplift WRC's performance because the building blocks are there.
Thank you.
Can I just draw the committee's attention to pages 41 to 50, where management have actually set out the responses, the timelines, and I think we just need to confirm then, are we as a committee happy with those responses, and then determine what our go forward action is going to be. Because I think it looks as though a substantial amount of the recommendations are being actioned at the present time. And we could just ask for an update on progress at subsequent meetings to make sure progress meets our requirement. Jennifer, do you have anything else?
Yeah, no, I'd be really happy with that. One comment I had on the say there were some items on training. It's just trying to get those systemic fixes into the response, that it's not just the training just now this year. It's going to be part of an annual or whatever ongoing.
Yes.
And so through the chair, if I can clarify, so the EPO are working in terms of and getting this training in as part of induction.
Yeah, awesome.
So there's an awareness, well, it's there now for all staff in terms of an awareness of project management. And then there are different offerings for different role types. So as people are coming into the organisation, they are being exposed to the need.
And so once they've come in, but say they're here for 10 years, do they get like a refresher at a certain point? Is there like a matrix that might
Yeah,
say?
there's a whole heap of communications that's being pushed out to the organisation through the EPO around, new materials or, what's offerings that are available, training that's being provided. All sorts of things like that. Yeah.
Which I'm assuming is more like a voluntary, like you read it and then that's good, versus you're on a matrix and it says you're due for a refresher of the project management software, whatever. That might be every 3 years or something. That's kind of what I'm looking for, is that it's part of a systemic, you're not going to get away if this is important kind of thing. Something I was subjected to once, so sharing the love. Yeah, and just because I don't want to put my light on again, I just wanted to say in regards to the maturity assessment report, which hasn't had as much love this meeting yet, I does look to have some good recommendations. I do agree with them, especially I saw there was a section for councillors. Very much agree with that. So in regards to, working with especially the Risk and Assurance Committee members on training of governance and director type stuff. So risk management. Thank you.
I think we've given this a good kicking. Can we just agree that we will then get report backs on those pages 41 to 50, which do recognise what you're doing and the timeframes that you're working within?
Yeah, and through the chair, I think the bit that we can add into this reporting is probably the risk rating or the criticality of it.
Yes.
So that you can actually hone in on the reds and see exactly what action is being taken on those as a priority, but definitely that full reporting in terms of where we're at on everything else that's been identified.
Yes, I didn't want to move off the risk maturity review, and I'd like to have some comments from you, David, on that, please.
Right. Yes, we'll do. So yes, I
Sorry,
think.
David.
Oh, apologies.
Sorry, I just interrupted you, David, just before we move off this topic. So just around those staff recommendations and stuff, the 2 management seminars that were in May and June, have they happened? So this is around that project initiation. I just want to make sure. So page 40, this is the staff coming back, or LT, et cetera, coming back to us with what they're doing. I just want to make sure what they're telling us they're doing.
Yes, they are. Yeah, so there was
So those-
benefits management session that was held yesterday, for example.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Sorry about that, David.
No, not at all. Not at all. So moving to the risk report, and hopefully we've front-footed some of the elements that you were concerned about with the previous report. So look, we've been involved with Waikato Regional Council and broader councils in the Waikato for I think it's coming up 7 years or 8 years, and hence there's a paper further on around actually it's time for a tender. But in that time, risk has been a strong focus across the council group, and 2 councils are ahead of the pack, and that is Waikato Regional Council and Waipa District Council. And the reason that they are the 2 councils that are ahead of the others, and in some ways are more sustained. I'd add Hamilton Council to that carefully, although they are moving very strongly in the right direction. But they've had a very sustained focus on risk over a period of time, and that's really important to build that broader culture, as compared to, again, similar to the EPO, short, sharp, let's do risk, then they lose focus, they go back to it a few years later. So I think that's really important. With the maturity rating, we rated it at the upper end of sustainable. That's a good rating. Yes, it'd be great to have it in the mature space, but I think compared to other councils, would generally be at middle to lower end of sustainable, again, because often they have earlier or they haven't picked up key elements in their approach. While we've supported the council in certain elements of its framework, this is the first time we've looked at the broader operating model for risk. And, you can be very good around risk identification or certain parts, but it's how the whole system fits together, which is really important across all the domains that we have looked at. We've recommended moving up to mature. There should always be improvement. Risk is a journey. You want to do it slowly and steadily, but we wouldn't, that is what we've recommended to smaller listed companies and councils. We feel integrated, although some areas are pushing to the upper end of mature, integrated and advanced for the insurance companies or banks that have far more resources to apply to risk, particularly the banks who have hundreds of people doing risk. So I think, some really good, strong positives for the council. There has been that sustained focus on risk. When we spoke to at a governance level, very good messages and feedback on how management is supporting this committee around understanding risk. The updates are solid. You've got good risk deep dives into risks that give you the visibility of those mitigations. There is a strong commitment at both governance and at executive levels, that other councils would envy in terms of particularly getting councillor involvement in aspects such as risk appetite. But there's always more to be done. In terms of the key areas that we are suggesting, is where we need to go to, is particularly around culture. And, rather than relying on risk registers, having people that really understand in our organisation, understand the bigger picture, understand where you have appetite for risk, where you don't, is a key area. We did see from the survey results, good understanding of risk and expectations at executive and governance levels. As you went down through the organisation, it wasn't as strong. So having more focus around training, around communicating risk appetite, which is still relatively early day, that we only did that work last year, so still fairly early on, I think will be a key next step. And I'm very comfortable that the team is very committed to doing that as well. So I think you've got a great team to move that forward. Other specifics around, at this governance level, for example, we work through that concept of interconnectivity, still not really showing up in the reporting. There's areas that we could enhance the reporting to have a more joined up view of what is going on, how do these things connect up. So I think that's an evolution. That's something that all organisations are trying to do, even up to banks. But trying to get that connected thinking we're part of an ecosystem of risk rather than let's report by risks one by one is important. To support that use of technology and I would say 5 years ago we were probably agnostic around whether you use spreadsheets or technology. I think we really need to start investing into our risk systems. So being able to use AI potentially in the future, connecting into your data sets, that is where risk needs to go to. So it's more informative. It helps to inform governance, monitoring, and decision making around risk. Speaking about decision making, that is a key opportunity for council as well. So we've done some quite detailed risk appetite work. What are the trade-offs we're happy to make, building that into decision making. So we're clear, management's clear. Where should we go? Where can't we go? If we want to go somewhere we have previously decided it's outside of appetite, we need to come back to governance to have a discussion about it. That will keep ramping up understanding of risk and getting a real clear risk culture within the organisation. Aligned to that decision making is a bit more focus at executive level, specifically on risk. So we have recommended that perhaps there's a setup of an executive risk level committee to mirror the level of focus by governance. Definitely not saying it's not there, it's there every day of the week, but a specific forum may help to concentrate that attention rather than it being woven through. Everything is risk, but woven through sort of the day-to-day monitoring and oversight of the organisation. In terms of the responses, good responses, I do see there's good commitment, and this is a journey. Again, not quick fixes, particularly culture, but I was very happy with. I thought it was a good report. I thought it was a good result for the council, and I feel it's a good way forward.
Questions? Yeah, I thought it was a good report and a fair assessment of risk maturity of WRC. And I certainly agree with your comments, David, that I think WRC does compare very favourably with other councils around the country in this risk space. So well done, but there's always room to improve. And I also was pleased to see that you were saying about halfway through the mature rating would be as far as they need to go. They don't need to push into the green. There wouldn't be a presumably sufficient benefit to justify the expenditure. So I was very happy with that. Any other questions or comments?
I note the comments on the reporting, and I kind of got some views, but I don't think this is a good venue to talk about them. So maybe so take those offline.
I think that's a good idea.
Very happy to do that.
So if there are no more questions or comments, can I have a mover and seconder to receive the internal activity report? Jennifer and Chris, all those in favour say aye. Against, carried. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
If we can move on to the strategic internal audit contract.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the purpose of this paper was to update the committee on the current status around the contract between CoLab and KPMG for internal audit services. So you'll see in the report that the current contract with KPMG is expiring at the end of May. They have negotiated an extension until the end of November and have a procurement process proposed and underway to re-tender for that internal audit contract. So any questions on that process?
Questions, comments? Paul?
Yeah, do we get to see the CoLab scoping document?
Yes, I haven't seen it yet.
Rolls
But,
through.
Yeah, I'm actually on the tender evaluation panel, so I can get a copy of that scoping contract document for you. It's no problem.
If there's no other comments, can we have a mover and seconder to receive this report, please? Angela, Paul, all those in favour say aye. Against, carried. Thank you very much. And external audit management reports. Clarence.
One.
Good morning.
Good morning and welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Excuse me. So, you want me just to start on the reports?
Please.
Thank you. So you'll see there's two management reports, one on the annual audit and then one on the consultation document that we've done. I'll take it as read. I think for the annual report audit, we made some recommendations, especially around, and then gave some feedback on some of our findings, and we're all aware of the issues that we had with the revaluation of the assets. Thank you. But if there's any specific questions on any of our recommendations or management comments, I'm more than happy to respond to those.
Questions? I had one, Clarence. Your letter is dated 24 November last year. We've had a meeting since then. Why has this taken so long to come through?
It was sent out on 24th with that date on. So I think we missed the cutoff for the previous meeting.
So that was probably a miss on my.
Would you like to comment on page 108? Maybe it'd be more appropriate for management. That table suggests we're not making much progress on addressing the improvements. Is there any reason for that?
So through the chair, I'm just, sorry, apologies, looking at the responses which are included on page 124 onwards. So most of them are noted as being in progress. Some of them will be addressed through the new system in terms of asset capitalisation forms. So the intent is to do away with those in terms of WIP capitalisation. So for infrastructure assets, between myself and the Integrated Catchment Management Directorate have brought in additional resource to actually catch up on some of that work that had been on hold, obviously with system changes and revaluations and the like. So there has been a concerted effort to readdress that. The old perennial of the accounting treatment of the investment in RSHL should go away would be the technical response to that. And likewise, I guess the beneficial around independent review of journals. Again, a slight difference of opinion on some of those.
Sorry, so basically it's a resourcing issue that, because these were previous issues that have been released and workload of the system changes, they just didn't.
Correct, but I think we will see at least further progress, if not complete closure of these being made through this year-end process.
Well, can I ask that we, as we've asked for already, reporting on progress for the project management, we ask for some reporting on progress on this, because I think fair to say I was quite surprised that I thought this was one of the more negative from the auditors that we've had over the years, and I think WRC is better than that. So I'd very much like to see make some progress in that. Any other comments or
Again, thank you for this, and I hear what you're saying, Graham. I just wanted to call out that the recommendation on reporting performance measures trending over time, I think is a really good one. That's one that I've had in my mind as well when reading reports in the past. So I see we're saying we'll consider including trend data in future. I just want to push that. And the only other point was interest declarations for key management personnel. I assume it's pretty standard that it's the CE and directors. I just wondered what your thoughts were on doing one level further down, the tier 3, because sometimes they have quite large areas of work that will sometimes drive a lot of then what the director does.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So yes, I will support that. I know that you do have the interest declarations for the procurement processes in that, but it is quite good if the more declarations you have, the more you're aware of what people's involvements are.
Something I'd recommend. Just considering the way we're structured at the moment, I feel like that would be a good level to go to, since it's not a huge effort to do it.
well, it's not. I actually think everyone should declare interests, because until you know them, you don't know whether they have any conflicts.
Yeah.
And might be quite innocuous, but it might be something needs to be addressed. So if you know them all, it's the only way you can make progress.
Yeah, but at the very least, that's where I'd go. Yeah.
Chris.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Look, I totally agree with what Jennifer's saying. Then I do know of a situation the next level down which should be disclosed, but I'm not going to disclose it here. I take issue with what you're saying, Mr. Chair, regarding the perceived criticism of the organisation. Last year was, I believe, and Janine can correct me if I'm wrong, but there was a huge effort had to go into the revaluation. Yes, it's first cut on that was not done properly, and there was subsequently there's a lot of extra work as a consequence of that, and that invariably puts a lot of extra strain on the people who are actually doing the year-end work, and you'd be familiar with that. So I don't see this as being a negative report. The work that had to go into the revaluation has been highlighted as being, it was an issue. It's hopefully now not going to be an ongoing issue with the new systems in place, and I'll have to get confirmation of that from our finance team leader. But I'm more than comfortable identified as the issues that had to be dealt with. Thanks.
Comment on that?
Through the chair, yes, thank you for the acknowledgement of the challenges of last year end with that revaluation. Certainly there were a number of contributors to that, and obviously we've sort of done a deep dive in our lessons learned. That my hope would be we're not in that position again, both from a process perspective as well as a data confidence perspective as well. Obviously, at this time, we also had a little system change that had hit the finance team as well, and we still live with the legacy of that for a little while longer in terms of our processes over the last 12 months, and indeed this year end is our first time of running through those processes with that technology change as well. So I don't think we're out of the woods quite yet around the pressures and challenges that are actually facing the finance function, but we're fighting the good fight.
Questions on the consultation document? Okay, we have a mover and seconder for the procedure report. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Warren. All those in favour say aye. Contrary, carried. Thank you very much. And I suggest we now take a break for 10 minutes and get a cup of tea. Before we start in again. Was brought together, I think. Yeah. Totally different. I know, but I looked through that, and normally they say we would assess this as merging. So, yeah, they did. They gave us a plus and a minus. You know, didn't see the same concerns coming.